What does 2025 have in store for you? Have you thought about what you want to achieve or what direction you want to take? You and I know that New Year's resolutions don't often survive the first week, but if you want to improve your work life so that you feel energised rather than drained, you might have some goals for the year. This week, I'm speaking to Dr Kim Daybell, a GP and former Paralympian who's represented the UK in London and Rio. While he was training to be a doctor, he was also training as an athlete and performing at the highest level and on the world stage. I don't know about you, but that sounds exhausting to me. Now, Kim was born with no fingers on his right hand. A toe transplant gives him some dexterity, but of course, working as a doctor does present its challenges. If you'd like to know how Kim is navigating a medical career with a disability, we've got a bonus video that you can find on our YouTube channel. And while you're there, you can check out all our other video podcast episodes, playlists and shorts that are there. Just follow the link in the show notes. But in this podcast episode, we're talking about the quality of time that you put into something, not just the quantity, and why it's so important for you to find work which you enjoy. Because let's face it, we spend enough time doing it.
Hi, I'm Dr Kim Daybell, former GB Paralympian, having competed in London and Rio and former world number 5. I'm now a resident doctor working at the Royal London Hospital, aiming to pursue a career in sports and exercise medicine.
It's great to have you on. I think there's lots of different things that we could talk about that I think be very useful for me and for our listeners. Firstly, can you just give us like a brief potted history of like your Olympic career and your life and how you came to be where you are now, really?
It's funny now kind of talking about it in past tense because I've retired about 3 years ago. And obviously it's been my whole life and it's kind of quite recent. But I started playing table tennis when I was sort of 8 or 9 years old. I had parents who were really kind of keen for me to play lots of sports. So played all the racket sports when I was younger: badminton, table tennis, and table tennis was kind of the one that came out on top, really. And I started competing for England in an able-bodied setup when I was around 9 or 10. And then that kind of just continued through really till I was 15, 16, and then chose to move into the sort of the Paralympic side of things. I was approached by GB Paralympics after we got the bid for London 2012. And I was kind of at that point weighing up my options with studies and university and thinking about going to medical school.
And did you do your medical training whilst you were playing, or did you wait till you'd finished?
So I started medical school when I was 19, and then I was just building up to London 2012. So really like kind of my career was just taking off really from a sports point of view. I was quite fortunate, I think, in that when I started medical school, I was already part of that sort of GB setup. And I think what you find a lot of the time is medical students coming in because you do have a lot of medical students actually who play sport to a high level or do something to quite a high level, given the kind of personalities I think that often enter into medicine. But luckily for me, because I was already quite a big part of that setup, they were amazing and they worked with me to kind of balance those two things. Obviously they're both sort of full-time undertakings, so making them work together was really, really tricky. But I did it all together. And then when I graduated and I was working as an F1 and F2, I worked part-time to try and fit my training in around that as well.
So did you do your medical training full-time then, as well as being a full-time athlete?
I did. I took years off. So I intercalated 1 year, which allowed quite a lot more time for practice. And then I took a whole year off sort of in between third and fourth year, I think. And that was the year before Rio. So I knew that I had to be full-time then to qualify, because the qualifying criteria are quite tough. And I wanted to give myself the best chance kind of possible going in.
It's amazing how you did that, really, because medical school is tough. Being an Olympic athlete is tough. And balancing all that, I've struggled just to do in those days we were called junior doctors, my JHO years, my SHO years. And I can't imagine, even if I was working less than full time, I can't imagine being able to balance the rigors of training with that. Was it tough, or did you get a good system of how to do that?
I mean, in retrospect now, when people kind of ask me that, I answer that question kind of a lot. And sometimes I struggle to kind of remember how I made it work. And I think you do have sort of rose-tinted glasses when you look back at it. And it was really, really hard. I think I remember the first couple of years in medical school, especially being really tough. because I was just, the national centre had moved to Sheffield when I was quite young. It was 13, 14. So sort of training was on my doorstep. Obviously I was living at home, and everything was focused on practice. And then when I went to medical school, I was in Leeds. So, and then you're out into the big bad world on your own, I suppose. And trying to find my way was quite difficult. I remember those first few years feeling kind of really burnt out, really tired all the time. And it took a while to kind of settle into the things you needed to do to make that kind of thing work. And I feel like I learned a lot along the way of how to balance those two things together. And it ended up kind of working really, really well. But mainly it was about building a team around me that could help support me get through that process. I think you kind of think you have to go through and do it all on your own. And when you try to do that, which is probably what I tried to do in the first few years, it feels impossible. It feels like a really difficult task, but picked up a lot of skills kind of along the way, I suppose, to make it work. And yeah, it worked really well in the end, but it was tough. A lot of very hard work, early mornings, sort of late nights and things. But luckily for me, it kind of panned out all right.
What was the secret then?
I think, like I said before, I think building a team was the biggest thing. I think I remember coming in at the end of second year, so that was just after London, and we were kind of just ramping up again for the Rio cycle, and kind of sitting down with my coaches and just saying, I'm not sure that I can do this again. Like it was a really amazing experience playing London, but it was a really tough kind of 4 years getting there. And we sat down and we kind of tried to figure out what we could do. And in the end, what happened was I think it was the head of my year or the dean of maybe even the dean of the medical school, that we ended up having a meeting together and planning what my year was going to look like. Because I think that's what I struggled with the most, was it felt relentless, because even, normally at medical school, you have some time off at Christmas and you get a bit of holiday and you can unwind and relax. And obviously during those times, I was going back to Sheffield to train kind of full time again. And we kind of worked out and broke everything down into blocks so that it felt a bit more kind of digestible, and picked out points in the year when I would need to be studying more, or points in the year where I could train a bit more, and then plan out all the tournaments and all of those things. So with that kind of careful planning, that definitely helped. And yeah, building that team of support. So, friends, family, coaches, physios, everyone kind of involved. I've got a lot of people to thank for making it all work, because I think allowing them to take some of the burden off you so that you can just focus on the things that you need to do makes a huge difference. And that prioritization of time, I think that was the main thing, because normally in the first couple of years I would just try and go sort of full pelt, everything, studies, training, the whole year, and by the end of it I was ruined. So I think knowing as well when to take holidays and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think doctors and people in healthcare, they can work really hard. They can, we can all do that. The problem comes when we know we need that team of support and help, but we don't know where to access it, or we don't think we should. We don't think we're valuable enough to access that. And I guess being an Olympic athlete, you're like, well, we've got this mission, and it's sort of easier to ask for help. But when you said you had a good team of support, what did they actually do?
I mean, particularly, if you're talking sort of friends and family, they were there just as kind of support and kind of to help me kind of unwind and listen to all my woes and my difficulties sort of with training and trying to make everything balanced. Because I mean, sport in itself is a really tough career, and same with medicine. It's very, very up and down. You have a lot of setbacks, and I think when Federer retired, he did a talk at Harvard, I think, and he was talking about this famous quote where he only won if you break down his matches, he only won 50% of the points that he ever played. And obviously he was one of the greatest tennis players to ever live. So I think that kind of message has always resonated with me as well, because as an athlete, you learn what it is to fail. And actually most of the tournaments, 95 of tournaments I've ever entered, I've not won, despite being kind of at that top level. And that puts a lot of strain on you. And I think, you need to share that with your support network and your friends and family, and basically just talk about things and communicate well with people, and not kind of bottle all of that up inside. And I think having them there just to chat and support was a big thing. And then just from a sort of a practical point of view, I think the medical school and the coaches worked together to plan my time so that it wasn't unmanageable. And what we kind of realize is what it comes down to is if you want to do something well, it needs to be quality over quantity. Obviously, you need to get the hours in, but what you do needs to be high quality. When you're very time poor, like I was then, when I was training, it needed to be sort of, top level training. When I was studying, it needed to be top level. There wasn't time for just kind of floating along and wasting weeks and months and doing things slowly. So they helped me from that point of view, just plan things and make sure that everything I did was focused and directed. And I think that's what really helped me.
So it's like do fewer things, but do them better.
Exactly, yeah. Because I think I was kind of getting into this phase of feeling like I wasn't achieving in either. I felt like I was kind of not mediocre, because obviously I was still playing for England at that time. But for what I was wanting to get out of it, I didn't feel like I was doing the best that I could. And it was just about working out, right, how can we change that from being pretty good at both these things to sort of excelling in both? And I think we found that balance, judging from like the results and what happened over those sort of 4 years.
So when you're talking about quality over quantity, you'd probably go for the best coaches for a smaller amount of time rather than some fairly mediocre coaches for just doing loads and loads and loads. How would you apply that principle to everything you do in life? How do you apply that principle now?
I think that's really tough, because I think, like you said, in sport, it's obvious, if when you're doing things right, you're winning basically, and you're getting good results, and you can see that everything's kind of going well. And I think with medicine, I think that's why it can be so tough as a medic, because I think you get a lot of people who come into medicine who are probably quite high achievers, and they've always done really, really well through school, and they've excelled in music and sport and blah blah blah, and they're used to being kind of the top dog basically, and a big fish, I suppose. And then you come to medical school and you're all put together, and suddenly you don't feel so special anymore, and it's quite tough. And then you start work and you really don't feel special anymore, because you're just kind of an F1, I suppose, sort of running around on the wards, feel like you don't know anything. And I think what I tried to do, I suppose, with medicine is take the small kind of wins and really kind of come away from comparison. I think that was one of the main things that helped me, is just thinking about yourself. Obviously with sport, it's very different. You are directly comparing yourself against the other athletes, and are you better than them or are you not? Whereas with medicine, I think it's very difficult. I mean, it's across, lots of different fields. People have lots of different strengths. And once you stop comparing yourself to other sort of doctors and other people around you in your field, and just focus purely on what is it that I stand for as a doctor, or what do I think that a good day looks like, and also taking the time to be grateful and to thank yourself is what helped with me, because quite a lot of the time, I think with medicine, that feedback is quite internal. I know we have the whole theory about reflective practice, and we're taught to reflect, but I think the reality of a busy sort of working world and medical world is that feedback often, what I found, particularly from kind of my seniors, was that it was always really positive. Everyone was always really nice. They said, "Oh, you're a good doctor. You're a nice person. We get on with you well," but it didn't feel kind of that genuine. And I think I was lucky, because I'd had that experience of reflection and feedback from sport, where obviously you're really under a microscope and you're taking criticism every single day, and you get used to taking that on and kind of using that. Whereas with medicine, you've kind of got to do it yourself. And actually, I do buy into that whole reflective feedback. You've just got to put a lot more effort into it, and not just see it as something that the portfolio tells you have to write 10 of, or whatever it is, to pass your kind of exams and things, and judge it by that, because it's hard, because you don't see a lot of tangible outcomes apart from some of the exams. So it was more about reflecting on myself and how I felt about myself as a doctor, and whether that was a positive feeling or a negative feeling that day or that month, or and then trying to build on it week on week and year on year.
Where do you think doctors get it wrong when it comes to sort of developing themselves? I'm just thinking of like various conferences. If you've got a set amount of days that you can go and do study leave or study or whatever, and I think a lot of doctors focus on, I'm just going to get the clinical knowledge right. I've got to learn this, learn that, but perhaps don't look at other bits of themselves that would that would be important. And I guess with sport, I'm guessing here that the psychology is quite important. Did you have a psychologist?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, psychology was there was a guy, a couple of psychologists I had through my career, and that made some of the biggest differences in my career, and kind of moved me from a sort of a top 10 player maybe to a top 5 player for a while in the world. And that psychology behind how to perform was a massive thing, which I still sort of take into medicine now, whether it's like exams or particularly stressful situations. And I always get a lot of feedback say I'm always seem quite calm at work, and even in like difficult situations, busy situations, always seem quite calm and able to take on kind of all that information and all the things I need to do. And take it in your stride, and kind of applying some of the, I mean, we worked a lot on mindfulness when I was playing, which I think is a very broad topic and can be used really well, can be used kind of really poorly, but it's kind of that living in the moment. And he used to kind of put it down so you can only sort of have sort of 5 things in your head at any one time. And when I was playing, if you were wasting some of those slots with negative thoughts, like, I don't know, what if I lose, or what am I going to have for dinner tonight, or whatever it is, then you're not using that headspace to kind of to perform basically, and to do the actual actions that you need to do. And I've managed to kind of take that into medicine and try and use that to break down, because what can be overwhelming, I think, especially when you're a young doctor, it's just all the things that you need to do seems very overwhelming, whether that's just your clinical responsibilities on top of your exams, on top of trying to get a job somewhere, on all those things. And actually you just need to break it down into small goals and things that are in front of you, and what you can actually do and what you can actually change, and not worry about the things that you can't, if that makes sense. I think it's a lot easier in sport in a lot of ways, and I think in medicine it's a completely different challenge. I do kind of feel like you were just saying about kind of thinking about all the things you need to learn, and the clinical stuff especially. What I'm kind of learning is that clinical stuff will probably take care of itself. And as you progress through, you will learn those things. And as you do your exams and as you choose what specialty you're going to do, you will learn those things. And actually, that's probably the least that you need to worry about. And actually, what I've found is, from working with, obviously, in the medical field for 5-6 years now, is that people get so focused on what they need to know to be a doctor that they forget, the things that they enjoy, and they don't pursue, they lose some of those hobbies, or they don't pursue the things that they really love. And then that's where that resentment builds up towards medicine. I think, you hear a lot of young doctors, especially, just quite frustrated and burnt out. And it's probably because they've had to, or they felt like they've had to sacrifice and forego some of the things that they really love, and that medicine doesn't allow space for that. And I'm not saying it's easy to do, because it's not, but there is space for it if you are willing to go for it and ask for that help and make space, I suppose, for it in your life. And I try to encourage people to do that wherever they can.
Yeah, I certainly remember as a junior doctor feeling like, I didn't have any time for any hobbies, anything. I just about managed to make it to the gym, once a week, do a bit of exercise. But apart from that, I was so tired. So how do you do it?
I think you have to hold yourself accountable. And I think that there's no getting round that it is hard. There's no easy way to do it. And I'm not going to sit here and say, actually, I made it work and it was dead easy and I never felt tired. And I felt tired a lot of the time. But by breaking it down into smaller chunks, so I used to break things down into sort of maybe like 1 month blocks. And if I felt like one day, I don't want to do this assignment today, or I don't want to go to the gym today, it would allow a bit of space to make that decision sometimes and say, actually, I am too tired and I'm going to relax. I'm going to watch TV and I'm going to unwind, and kind of that's also important in terms of performing, because you need to be rested and you need to, not feel really tired all the time. But it was knowing that, okay, but in this period, I need to have this done by this time. And that's a non-negotiable. So I would have like non-negotiables in my timetable, whether that was fitting in 10 gym sessions within the month, or 15 training sessions within the month. Those things had to be completed. So it just meant that in the times when I was sort of knackered or really didn't want to do it, but you have to push yourself and you have to go and do it. Breaking it down into those more digestible chunks made it feel a lot easier than just saying, okay, so I've got a year. By the end of it, I need to be world number 10 and I need to have excelled in XYZ exams. That's just completely unmanageable. Like I wouldn't that seems like an impossible target. And actually, yeah, you need to just have those short-term goals so you can have short-term wins and keep your motivation moving forward.
Yeah, those process goals, they're so much easier to hit, aren't they? Because actually you don't have a huge amount of control of your world ranking, because you don't have control over anybody else, but you do have control over saying, so if your goal was, I am going to be number 5 in the world by the end of the year, you may or may not hit it. But if you said, every month I will go to the gym 10 times, you can do that. And then you're more likely to hit that sort of outcome goal, aren't you? I think what we forget about how important process goals are, particularly as medics, we focus on the outcome goal because we're so used to achieving and we're so used to doing that. We forget that if you just do these little things along the way, you're probably going to get there. But I'm interested, how did you decide what your non-negotiables were going to be versus the things that could just fall by the wayside?
So that was kind of done with alongside kind of coaches and psychologists normally. Obviously with medicine, your non-negotiables are always basically passing your exams when you're at medical school or going to work when you were working. Whereas with sport, I think it was kind of a bit different. So I mean, once I'd started training for London, I mean, I've been a player for about 10 years by that point. So I knew what made me tick and what I needed to do to perform and what I needed to do to make sure I was on that top level. And we basically just make a list. So it was like, okay, we know that in the build up to a World Championships, you need 3 months of, really good quality training. And that's like a minimum, you need this many sessions. We need to work on these things. We need to address, your psychology and all of that kind of thing. We'd make a list and then plan it into a week that kind of fitted everything into that. And I didn't have the kind of the luxury for most of the athletes who play full time. You could just kind of do all of it, and some stuff you wouldn't. It's a bit like, again, being at medical school. Like, we all know there were some topics you didn't really need to do, and they were timetable fillers, if we're being honest. And those are the things that could give, and they were my negotiables, I suppose. I didn't necessarily need to attend all of those, and that's where medical school were really good. I think they recognised that maybe I didn't need to go to those seminars, but these ones, you can't pass if you're not at those. And working it out like that is kind of how I did it. And yeah, just starting with a list and starting with a conversation. I think that's the most important thing. Is it was reaching out and actually saying, I am struggling. I can't do this on my own. I need you to help me. Can you help me do that? And I think that's where it kind of, we made it work.
Did they help you prioritize these things then, or did you decide what the priorities were, or was it, I guess the question is, how helpful is it to discuss your priorities with other people? Do other people truly know?
Good question. I think when it comes to sport, I think my coaches did know, because, they're kind of top level coaches and they know what it takes to be a top level player. I think as I got older, it started to change. I think as I sort of became more of an adult and my own person, then it was more me directing what I knew worked for me and what didn't work for me. But when I was younger, it was a bit more formulaic and being like, these are the things that we know that you need to do. And that relationship kind of changes over time. And as you get older and get a bit more experience, you know what is needed for you, but you need that help. And it was trial and error. It wasn't like we just sat down and said, this is what needs to happen. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And then we would adjust it a bit and change things. And it all kind of came to a head in Rio, where I was world number 5 going in, I think, and got to the quarterfinals, which was really good, and had beat the world number 2 that year. And it was a great year for me. It kind of, that's where everything sort of came together. And I think that's where we had got, over the course of 4 or 5 years, we'd finally, in that last year or so, got everything sort of spot on for me to perform at the best level. And then those 2-3 years around that were the best of my career. So it took time, and it takes trial and effort. And I think that's what is daunting for people, is they don't start trying because they're worried it will fail. So they don't even start. And actually, you've just got to be like, we're going to do it. Let's just try and do it and see what happens. And we'll adjust things, and we'll change things as we move on, and we'll perfect it over time. And it's not something that's just going to happen overnight. And, you wake up with a list and you're like, okay, if I tick all these things off, then I'll be the best player in England, and I'll be, the top person in my medical, or whatever goals you've got. And it takes time. And just, I think the main thing for me was just not being afraid to fail, I suppose, and not being afraid for things not to go right, and just every time you lose or every time you fail, it's a lesson learned. So it's not always a bad thing, I think was one of the things I tried to take away from it.
Yeah, it's easier said than done in sport, isn't it? Because you know that you will fail like Federer did. 50% of the times you'll always be beaten by someone eventually, won't you? But in our jobs, it feels, when we fail, it just feels crushing, and it feels like there's something wrong with us, even though nobody can be perfect straight away and nobody can be perfect full time either. How would you help doctors just get over this fear of failure? And it is a pathological fear of failure. It really is. I mean, partly because sometimes the stakes are really high if you do fail. But in my experience, we're very, very bad, even with the little things that don't matter as well.
I completely agree. I think I've noticed it working like within hospitals and things, is that people are so scared of getting things wrong. And when something does go wrong clinically, you often see it like, the first thing everyone's doing is going back through the notes, trying to see like, what did I do wrong? Where was my mistake? And, I hope it wasn't me meant that happened. And actually what I used to do is I would go back and I'd be like, where did I go wrong? And I, not excited, but I would want to see, because I think people go back through and they look through all that because they're wanting reassurance that it wasn't them. And actually, first of all, I think we're all just very small cogs in a big wheel. So often when things go wrong, it's not entirely your fault. There might have been something you could have done, but generally it's it's an institutional problem, or it's the team needs to come together to reflect on what the decisions that were made. But it's a group thing. It's a team effort. It's not a solo mistake. I mean, I get different specialties, obviously within, say, GP world, it can feel a bit different, I suppose, because you are sort of working solo a lot of the time with patients, but especially within a hospital, it's a team thing. And I would kind of go back looking for the mistakes that I might have made and try and go to maybe the consultant and say, do you think that I could have done this differently? Not try and cover it up and be like, oh no, pretend that I didn't, there's nothing I could have done, which I think a lot of people do try to do. And I think it's changing that mindset of when you get something wrong, it being a bad thing. Because when you get something wrong, if you do something wrong multiple times, that is a bad thing. You need to address that. But if it's the first time, it's fine. Like you said, we're not perfect, and we will make mistakes, and those mistakes are what you learn from. You don't always learn from when you've done things really well. That's you just go, okay, that's great, I did that really well, but you don't learn anything from that. But when things go badly, that's where you really learn. And if you can take that on board and reflect on that, like I was saying earlier, and don't make that same mistake again, or change the way you practice a little bit, then you've developed that day and you've learned something that day. And I think that's kind of the attitude I try to take into it.
One of the questions I like to ask is even better if. What would have been even better if? Because that sort of takes away you failed, like, what did I do wrong? It's like, well, what could have been improved here? No judgment, blame, but it would have been even better if, like, maybe I'd been a little bit more patient there, or I'd noticed that result there, or something like that. It sort of takes the shame and judgment. But
that's where sport really helped me, because I think that, like, even when I won tournaments, the first thing that we would do when I came back into training, the next morning or the next day, it'd be like, well done, that was great, but you did this, this, and this, and this was wrong, and that was wrong. And at first, when you're younger, especially as a younger athlete, that can feel quite difficult, because you're like, well, what am I meant to do? I've just won and I'm still getting criticised. But actually, you start to realise that it's not a criticism on you. They're just trying to help you be even better for next time. And I think I got used to that process of reflection, feedback, and taking it on board and not taking it personally. I think that was like the main thing. It was like, this is to help me, not to put me down. And that's where I think a lot of young doctors and older doctors probably struggle, is that criticism side of things and that feedback side of things. People don't take it well, is what I've learned. And often as you move through as a young doctor, a lot of the feedback is all quite generic and just all really positive, and like, you're doing great, and you read everyone's portfolio and it says they're all the best doctors ever, because basically people just can't really be bothered, I think, to give negative feedback, because it then means more work, more conversations, and like, oh, but like, what if this? And then because we move on so quickly as well, you move on after 4 months with all your rotations, it's a lot easier for everyone just to go, we were all fine, this was all great, let's all. And you see it all the time, even when there's really bad things going on within departments or within teams, and it's like, how is the feedback from this? I'll come to the end of some jobs that have been terrible, and I'll be like, how's the generic feedback, what's written down on paper, basically say that everything was great. And it's kind of, it's a funny thing.
Do you think that's because we're not actually very good at receiving negative feedback, so then people are very worried about giving it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's become like a bit of a worry about how someone's going to react if you say something bad. But again, it's changing those words and changing that kind of the way we set things up. It's not bad, feedback isn't bad, feedback's good. And there's a way of delivering it, I think, as well, which I think is difficult for sometimes. Some consultants are, and sort of senior registrars, they're amazing at it. They're really good at teaching. They're really good at feeding back. And they're the ones that you feel you learn from the most, the ones who kind of come to you being like, I think you could do this better. But it's not in a attacking way. It's in a kind of a really positive way, because they'll say, give you things to work on. And that's where I think people get it right. But in a busy working world, especially for consultants, when they're so busy, like, I completely appreciate that having that time to properly feedback and reflect with their sort of people they're supervising, it's not always easy. But I think that juniors are so afraid to receive any form of feedback. They're like, I think it almost makes the seniors be, oh, well, what's the point? They're going to be all right. I'm sure they'll still be fine as doctors. It's not going to be a problem. So let's just say it's all good.
Then you just have to intuit about what's going on with your own behaviour. I think it's very difficult to assess the way that you are experienced by somebody else, the impact of you on someone else. I can guess, but it's much more helpful if someone would say. And someone said to me recently that the best way to give feedback is to get the other person to give it to themselves first. And I'm presuming that when you went to get your feedback about your matches, rather than sitting them down and go, right, let me tell you what you've done wrong, did they ask you first to go, right, what do you think?
Yeah, they would. And generally, like, athletes are never happy. So normally athletes will come into those sessions being like, oh, I didn't do this and I didn't do that, and this could have been better. And sometimes you actually need the coach to pull you back and say, no, you were pretty good still. Like, don't worry, like, things are going well. But it's a completely different mindset, I think, because you're pushing so hard at the highest level. So it's kind of, you have to kind of be like that. But yeah, I think most of the time it, especially as the athletes get more experience, it's them coming in saying, this didn't feel right. I want to work on this. I want to do this better. Which is not something that really happens in medicine. Like, I can't imagine going into like one of my end of supervisor meetings really and saying, oh, I thought this was bad and I thought this could have been better and this could have been better. It's just, I don't know, it's not really like that it should be. And I think we could all be a lot better for it and feel a lot better for it. Because I think sometimes as well, when you voice some of those insecurities or some of those things where you feel you're weak, sometimes you actually get feedback that they go, well, what do you mean? I think that's probably in your head a little bit, and you've spent all this time worrying about it. And if you'd have just said it, they might actually come back and say, well, actually, I think you're really good in this clinical area, or I think you've got great communication and you can feel a bit better about it, which can help, from that point of view as well.
I think that we need to be seeking feedback much more ourselves as well. It's like, don't wait to the end of your clinical attachment or your rotation, but constantly saying, in the moment, I think I could have done that interaction better. What could have been better? Someone told me recently that if you say to someone, rate yourself out of 10, where would you score yourself for that thing? And they go, well, probably 6. Okay, why was that? Tell me about it. Then they'll come up with the points. You can go, I agree, actually. I think probably to get to 7, you could have done this. And then it's a learning experience. But if we're always doing that, rather than waiting to an end of attachment thing, then it becomes a lot quicker. And I'm thinking for people that are still doctors in training, that then makes it much easier for the consultant just to give you some quick in-the-moment feedback. If you're going, can I just stop there? Can I have 2 minutes of your time? I mean, I don't know if anyone would do this. Yeah. I'm not sure I would have done it, but I'm just wondering, can I have 2 minutes of your time? In that ward round there, I felt I probably did a 6 out of 10 because I probably needed to have done this. Is there anything else that would have got me up to 7 or 8? What do you think? And that gives them permission to go, actually, yeah, this. And how useful would that be, right? Yeah,
I mean, I completely agree. And I try to do that when I'm in my practice. I think, like, even when, I don't know, like the other day, for example, I was working and I did something and then I needed to speak to a specialty registrar about whatever to do next. Is quite complicated. And you pick up the phone to them and everyone, you know what it's like in hospitals, especially, everyone's so busy and a bit short with you. And you just feel like, oh, I just want to get some advice, please. Can you help me, please? And they'll say something and then hang the phone up. And actually, like, I took a minute to say, well, I was going to do this. What do you think? Just for my own learning, what would you do? And actually, when you pose things, I think, to people like that, because you genuinely want to, they're the expert. You genuinely want to learn from them, and if you approach it in that way, what I found is people are always a lot more willing to help you. Then most people are really nice. I think we get this kind of worry that all the senior doctors are super scary and they're terrifying, and I don't want to have to take up too much of their time. But if you show that you're engaging and you're just wanting to learn as a young doctor, most of them are lovely, and they're really willing to pass on that knowledge and pass on that help to someone who's genuinely interested, and genuinely kind of wants to get better. So I think if you can kind of do it in that way, I think most people are really receptive to that, and you can have a really good conversation and you can actually learn something. But it's about how you approach it, because most of the time it's almost like I always feel like in hospital you're like borrowing time off people who don't have it, and actually they do have a little bit of time and they are willing to help you, and it's just kind of breaking down those barriers, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's even phrasing it like, thank you, that was really helpful. Next time, what else should I do to make this quicker and easier for you?
Yeah, exactly. It comes down to completely down to communication, and that kind of, it goes back to what I was saying about how I managed to balance the two things so well, is having those open lines of communication with the people that I needed to, so that I could get the feedback that I needed and kind of adjust things for myself to make it work as well as possible.
Did your sports psychologist, help you to stop taking that thing so personally? What would they have helped you with to help you do that? Because I think that's such not failure. I don't want to say failing. It's a behaviour that doesn't work for us in medicine, where we take everything so personally. But you can't in sport, right? Yeah,
no, I think the psychologist definitely helped me. I think you learn a lot just from reflection, and kind of, we would do a lot of work on kind of not taking things personally, and just having like an acceptance of the people that are around you are telling you these things, but to help you, not to hinder you, I suppose. It takes a lot of time, I think, because it isn't easy to be told all the time that you need to do something better, but it helps you along that journey. And I think what I did a lot of work on with my psychologist was trying to enjoy the journey, because I think that as athletes, we do become very sort of outcome focused. It's about whether you win gold or not, and you'll see you'll chat to. I've had some really interesting conversations with other athletes who have won a gold medal, for example. I remember sitting down with one of the guys who's one of our best players in the world, Will Bailey, and he has won multiple world championships, Paralympics, and he's the top guy really in our team. And when he won his first world championships, I remember chatting to him, and he said that he got home and he sat down on his sofa with his medal, and he was kind of like, is that it? He had this like moment of, and it's a big thing for athletes, once they've achieved that top thing, they suddenly have a bit of a dip, because they've achieved this thing and they don't know where to go next, essentially. And they're kind of like, was that it? I suppose, is that everything that I've been working towards? And then I think what he realized, and what I took a lot from that, was he wanted to enjoy the process of getting there and trying to move away a little bit from just it being about this end result, because you can suddenly get somewhere and find, okay, I've got it, but did I enjoy that whole time? And I think that's a really poignant point within medicine, because you talk to lots of people through their medical careers, and the general feedback is always, it'll be better when I've finished my junior doctor years, it'll be better when I finish my house office years, it'll be better once I'm a consultant. And they go through that whole time, and then you look back at it all and you go, did I actually enjoy that whole thing? I'm not really sure. And actually, that's what I was trying to do within table tennis, was make sure that after like a 4-year cycle, I could look back at the whole thing and say, win or lose, and say, I really enjoyed that, and I would do it all again with the same result. And I tried to take that into medicine as well, so that you're not always just striving to get the next job or striving to pass the next exam, because before you know it, 10, 15 years could have gone by and you can feel like you didn't enjoy any of it, which I think is really sad and a real shame, because I don't think medicine needs to be like that. I think it's a really fulfilling career, which can be really amazing. It's just very tough and takes a lot of emotional resilience, and you have to try and enjoy it along the way, because you've chosen to do it. My coach always used to say to me when things were hard, and I was like, I don't know if he'd be like, you're choosing to be here, Kim, like no one's making you. You can walk out the door any day you want, and turn your back on it if it's too much.
That is interesting. Yeah, we are choosing to do what we do. At any point we could stop, and yes, there will be consequences, of course, and financial consequences, and all sorts of consequences. However, Nobody has a gun to our head literally saying do it. And it strikes me that's where actually being very, very intentional about planning how you're going to live, what your week is going to look like, what your year is going to look like is so important. But we seem to only give ourselves permission to do it when we're in a high stakes thing, being a Paralympian, etc., etc. We're like, yeah, okay, that's really high stakes, so I can do it. But of course, and I'm sure you'd agree, lots of other people have very busy lives in other ways. If you have children or you're a carer or you've got all sorts of other things going on, that needs planning just as much and getting a support team around us. But we think that, that's minor, so I shouldn't really do it. I shouldn't need to. But for me, planning my weeks and planning my sort of quarters has been the one thing that's got me through stuff. I've got 3 teenage kids, etc. So, but unless I actually work out, what are my priorities this week? What do I want to do in terms of fitness, in terms of seeing my friends? Otherwise, work would just expand to fill every single little tiny slot.
And it's not always, like you said, it's not always about having some big end goal that you want to achieve. Like for me, it was sometimes I say it was easy for me because, I had this end goal to aim towards, and I had a team of people around me, helping me get there. And I completely appreciate that that's not something that most people have. And, most people don't have 6, 7 people working full time to help them achieve the goals that they want to achieve. But again, if you break it down to kind of like the journey rather than the end result, I think that if it's something that you really enjoy, and it doesn't have to be something that you do at a high level or anything, but if it's something you enjoy, it means it's something really important and you need to carve that time out for it. And it probably, what you'll see then is a knock-on effect to your sort of professional life. Say within medicine, you probably find that you're happier at work and that you actually perform a lot better and you resent it less because it's not taking you away from the thing that you love doing. And I think that all of that's really, really important and something that we really struggle with as doctors. I think really, really struggle with. It's a major problem, which is probably why doctors are quite a lot of the time are sort of quite fed up, I suppose, with
pissed off, I think is the word.
Yeah, pissed off, yeah. Disillusioned, yeah, that's
unhappy.
Yeah.
We do only have one life, and as one of my podcast guests said years ago, it was quite a long time ago, she's like, well, goodness me, you spend so much of your time at work. Is it not? I think it's reasonable to think you're going to at least like it, even if you don't love it. So there's something about enjoying the journey, but there's also something about making the most of those snippets of time that you do have. I have a tennis lesson every week. I love playing tennis. I'm not very good at it at all, but I have a coach, because actually I get so much out of that 1 hour playing with a coach than I probably would do out of 2 hours playing back and forth over the net with some people that, were sort of my standards. So that, I think, is looking at sort of quality over quantity. But the other thing that struck me when you said about the team that was supporting you, I thought you were going to say, I had a personal driver and this and that. But you said actually a lot of it was just moral support. You can talk things through with them. And we can all have teams like that behind us, even if we don't have the practical help. Although, can I just say, I think that a lot of medics, and maybe there is a bit of a gender bias here, particularly sort of mums, for some reason, we feel shame for asking for practical help. I have a cleaner, I get a meal box, because I know that I need that to sort of function. But lots of people feel really awful that they're asking for this practical help. But if you don't have time and you would rather spend the precious time that you do have doing something that's important to you, get help, pay for it, because I know salaries haven't risen that much, but relatively cash rich, time poor.
No, I completely agree. I think it's about those sort of non-negotiables and the things that you need. So for you, it might be, that I need to fit in that tennis lesson this week, because if I don't, then it's going to have a knock-on effect on my whole week. I'm going to be a bit miserable. I'm going to be mean to my kids, and it's all going to be a bit rubbish. And actually, like you said, if you can, what can give a little bit here and there so that I can make sure that I do that. And it's not, I think, again, people see it as a selfish thing, and that it's something you're doing for yourself, and that's not right, because we always have to be giving every bit of ourselves to our work or our family or whatever it is. But if it means that you can then give all those things in a more positive way, and you can do it with all of you and be completely present because you've carved out that time for yourself, then it's not a selfish thing anymore. It's just something that you feel like you need to do to perform on the highest level that you can.
More and more, I'm coming to think that it shouldn't be called self-care. it shouldn't even be called necessary care, it should be called essential care. I mean, as an athlete, you knew you had to take care of yourself, and presumably your team would get quite cross with you if you hadn't been. So like, well, we're putting all this effort. You've been out partying till 3 a.m. Hang on a sec. You don't own your body. We do, because we're training you up to like win the Olympics. But we don't think like that in medicine. But, you know, frankly, I do not want to be operated on by a surgeon who has not had any time to rest because they run ragged with their family because they haven't got any help in or whatever. I want to be operated on by someone who has taken the time to be as mentally and physically fit as they can.
Absolutely. And I think part of the problem as an institutional thing, one of the things I really struggle with as a doctor is it's not the work actually that you do. Like, I love the work. Like, I actually really like being at work, and it's all the stuff that comes alongside that you have to do in your spare time, and basic things, you know, from your pay not being right and having to like ring HMRC every month to kind of adjust things, or, you know, the rota not being worked out properly, or whatever it is, kind of just all that extra stuff and all those extra everything you have to kind of fill in that kind of detracts from the work itself is a real shame, because they're kind of all just distractors. And I appreciate, you know, within every field there is that stuff and all that red tape and just things you have to do. But I think within medicine, it is particularly prominent, if you like, which is a shame, because it takes doctors away from what they really are good at and what they really love doing, which is sort of treating patients, hopefully.
Yeah, Hertzberg, they called them the hygiene factors at work, you know, like the admin, you know, the facilities, can you park your car, all these sorts of things that just detract from actually making the job as good as it can be. But if you were to, you know, everything you've learned, you know, through your career, if you were to summarize that in 3 top tips for sort of how to have a sustainable career and, you know, perform to your best going forward, what would they be?
3 top tips. I think that prioritization would be kind of my number one. I think knowing which areas of your life you need to push in certain times is the key thing. I think that, and that's the kind of the whole secret really, is that prioritization and time management skills if you want to succeed in lots of different areas, whether that's in sport or at home or in music or medicine or whatever it is. It's just knowing when something needs a bit more of your time and attention. That would be kind of my number one. I mean, my number 2 would be sort of quality over quantity, which is kind of what we've said before. I think that doing something well for a short period of time is a lot better than doing something poorly for a long period of time. It's not necessarily the hours you put into things, but it's about the quality hours that you put in. My coach always used to say sort of practice makes permanent rather than practice makes perfect. So it's kind of whatever you practice doing is what you will then go out and do. So if you practice things at a good level and at a high level, you will go out and do it at a high level. And the final thing I think is just enjoyment. I think you've got to enjoy whatever you do. And if you're not, that's where you've got to maybe sit down and have a think about if there's something you need to change or something you need to adjust, because the whole point of all this is that we want to be here and we want to enjoy it, and you need to enjoy that journey. So if you don't, you're not going to be able to maintain and sustain it for any prolonged period. So yeah, they're the kind of the top 3.
I love those because there is a difference between not enjoying your work because of all those irritating factors that come in, and a difference between actually, I don't actually like what the core of my work is. If you don't like that, then find something that you do like. Absolutely. And practice makes permanent. I'm gonna take that. I love that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I always remember that one.
It really is. Kim, thank you so much for being with us. If people want to get a hold of you, how would they contact you?
Yeah, that's fine. You can get me on my email address, kim.daybell1@nhs.net, or Instagram as well, kim.daybell. So yeah, I normally reply to kind of messages if people just have any questions.